This program was made possible by...
Oh, I did not see you there. Hi, I'm Shohag Shahadur of Shohag's Show Shack. Come take a walk with me. Did you know that it's statistically proven that there's a correlation of 500% between white people and bad dancing? Are you one of those people? With my Quintet Threat program of singing, dancing, acting, modeling, and rapping, and new abilities such as puppeteer, magician, and psychic, even you, a loser, can become a zero to a hero. Oh, sorry, that was my fake laugh. So act now before all my shit's gone. Call 1-8-BEN-MACKAY. I repeat, 1-8-BEN-MACKAY. Now back to the program.
And made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't see you there. Well, now that you're here, let's take some time to talk about the domestic policies of our president.
After years of drawn-out warfare, the Allies have finally taken victory from the Axis powers.
As America's soldiers were returning home, little did they know that their lives were going to change.
This is the first non-secret docking of the Queen Elizabeth, her first voyage with lights showing and portholes open. These are the guys who helped win it for us against the Nazis, and the entire nation welcomes them home.
The 1950s were defined by its security, prosperity, and social mobility. Post-World War II America was remarkably different from post-World War I America. The economy skyrocketed, and the middle class grew, shaping American life.
There was an increase in higher education as more and more middle-class families seek to go to college.
Women also began to impact the economy. The number of women in the workforce doubled. These middle-class, married, and middle-aged women became teachers and took on small office and sales jobs. No longer were they confined to the home, they now became essential money makers for their families.
America was in its best shape and had material abundance, shaping American life and character. But social inequalities at the time contradicted American ideals. Dwight D. Eisenhower suited the mood of the 1950s. He was seen as the best candidate to end the Korean War. He also led a crusade for decent government. The people considered him as a modern George Washington. He adopted a view of separation of powers, with limited federal involvement.
The need to maintain balance in and among national programs. Balance between the private and the public economy. Balance between the cost and hoped for advantages. Balance between the clearly necessary and the comfortably desirable. Balance between our essential requirements as a nation and the duties imposed by the nation upon the individual. Balance between actions of the moment and the national welfare of the future. Good judgment seeks balance in progress. Lack of it eventually finds imbalance and frustration. The record of many decades stands as proof that our people and their government have, in the main, understood these truths and have responded to them well in the face of threat and stress.
In May 1953, he signed the Submerged Land Act, turning over rights to shore oil deposits to state governments. Ironically, Eisenhower also enlarged the welfare state. The Social Security system was expanded to include more workers, to increase benefits and lower age eligibility for old age pensions. In 1955, Congress raised the minimum wage from 75 cents to $1. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956 is also another testament of the federal government's involvement. This act stimulated the construction of a modern interstate highway system, reducing traffic accidents and congestion.
Highway Act of 1956, providing the staggering sum of $51 billion to be spent by the states on highway construction by 1971. The most talked about phase of the act is the interstate highway system, a 41,000-mile network of our most important roads. Most of these roads will be 4, 6, even 8-lane expressways constructed for through traffic. They will take the over-the-road driver from city to city, coast to coast, at highway speeds, even through large population centers. The Federal Aid Highway Act offers relief to the local driver, too, by giving him easy access to his home, work, stores, without interference from through traffic. Billions of dollars will be spent for city streets and expressways and for other highways of the primary system. The farmer, too, benefits directly from the billions allotted for the improvement of state and county highways, as well as the farm-to-market roads of our rural system. These new highways will have a far-reaching economic impact on the entire nation. They provide a heavy-duty link between all parts of productive America. They are a shot in the arm for cities that have begun to feel the impact of growing downtown traffic congestion. They open up vast new areas for suburban living, and they encourage industry to disperse out of city congestion.
Eisenhower also toughened the government loyalty program. To appease right-wing Republicans, Scott McLeod, a McCarthyite, was appointed as security officer. The hysteria began to fade in 1954. Eisenhower disapproved of McCarthy's tactics, but did not want to hurt his relationships with other Republicans. This all changed when McCarthy targeted the Army and the Senate and accused them of supporting communism. His wild accusations alienated Senate Democrats and some Republicans. His popularity continued to dwindle until his death.
Do you mind telling us of your experience during McCarthy's time?
Oh, McCarthy, that man. He was in charge of these loyalty tests for the government. I remember being in a room surrounded by these suspicious people. What does that have to do with my loyalty? And they said, just answer the question, sir. So I thought about it and I said, beef stroganoff. They told me then that I failed.
Eisenhower's most significant contribution to civil liberties is his appointment of Earl Warren as Chief Justice in 1953. The Supreme Court began to take a leading role in defending civil liberties. On May 17, 1954, in Brown v. Board of Education, the court overturned the separate but equal doctrine. So they decided to allow time to implement desegregation. The Supreme Court's ruling formed white citizens' councils to create economic pressure on blacks and white businessmen. Local school officials were given authority to defy federal court orders. Nathan B. Force High School. Does it ring a bell? Black and white children were assigned to different schools. Eisenhower's administration ended segregation in Washington's restaurants, hotels, theaters, and public schools. Exposed the civil rights crisis was in Little Rock, Arkansas. Desegregation of Central High School was scheduled, but Orville Faubus, the governor, sent the National Guard to prevent integration. When the federal judge ordered them to desist, a mob overwhelmed the police, who tried to protect the black students. So Eisenhower had to send in federal troops to uphold the court order.
Hi there. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about desegregation?
I'm South African, and I don't know how to say this, but I'm not black.
Oh. So now we're going to have some words from best-selling author Erin Kendrick of the novel Segregation or Integration. So could you tell us a little bit about your memories of the time?
Hard times, I can tell you. The Southern people were not necessarily willing to change and allow the integration of black people to their society and culture.
Exactly. So, you know, things like schools, integration in schools, how was your experience with that?
I personally wasn't allowed to go to a top white Southern school immediately. Coming from Alabama, especially Montgomery, it was very terrible for me personally. But eventually in high school I was allowed to join.
So they resisted, just like in Little Rock, Arkansas?
Yes, yes. Except Eisenhower didn't send military troops to help us. I know he would try if he could, but he just didn't have the manpower.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John F. Kennedy could not have been prepared for what he was up against. With the help of the recession, he inherited an extremely sluggish economy. He was aware of the fact that changes needed to be made, so he confided in the American people for support of his campaign, The New Frontier.
For the problems are not all solved, and the battles are not all won. And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, the frontier of unfilled hopes and unfilled threats. Woodrow Wilson's New Freedom promised our nation a new political and economic framework. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal promised security and succor to those in need. But the new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges. It sums up not what I intend to offer to the American people, but what I intend to ask.
Kennedy began his New Frontier campaign by focusing on the economy. Because of the evident economic instability, Kennedy intended to keep inflation levels low. He achieved this by establishing voluntary wage price guidelines. In 1962, the steel workers agreed to a contract with no wage increases, and in 1963 he proposed a tax cut to stimulate the economy and adopted a pro-labor stance. Several of Kennedy's domestic policies were successful in his attempts to aid businesses and Americans in need. He aided businesses by increasing tax benefits for companies investing in new equipment, and aided 4 million Americans by doubling their food rations his first day in office. Congress agreed in this sense by aiding economically depressed areas in the United States. Unfortunately, Congress and Kennedy did not always agree, and they did not pass Kennedy's farm program, which was created with the intention to aid farms that were overproducing with low income.
From a woman's perspective, how did you feel about all of these changes?
Well, Kennedy, he was a fine man. But in terms of his presidency, I think he equalized us to men with the Equal Pay Act. He increased the minimum wage overall, which was great.
Drop that da-da-da. Hey, don't drop that. In terms of rating, how would you rate Kennedy?
Straight up 10. Hair on point, height on point, everything on point.
I mean, in terms of his presidency.
Oh, that was fine too.
Besides equalizing women's wages and increasing the minimum wage, Kennedy also developed social benefits through his New Frontier campaign. He aided dependent children and increased Social Security benefits. In terms of civil rights, he federalized the Alabama National Guard to ensure the desegregation of the University of Alabama and other public schools. Along with this, Kennedy ordered an end to racial discrimination in housing owned, operated, or financed by the federal government. The government also became more integrated as Kennedy appointed blacks to prominent federal positions. Kennedy was a president who changed several aspects of the American life through his presidency. He is considered one of the most influential presidents the United States has had to offer. Unfortunately, he was not able to continue bettering the country as he was assassinated at the young age of 46 on November 22, 1963.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
With the nation in a state of shock, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson succeeds to the presidency and is sworn in aboard Air Force One. After completing Kennedy's term, Johnson went on to run for president in the 1964 election. He was unopposed at the Democratic Convention and won in a landslide over Republican Barry Goldwater, who was often viewed as extremist due to his firm stand against communism, support of greater military force in Vietnam, and support of cutting back on federal government programs, among other things. And just like that, the LBJ era began. Johnson's administration was accompanied by rapid social change. On January 4, 1965, Johnson outlined his intentions for the Great Society program during the State of the Union. The main points of focus for the Great Society were Medicare for the elderly, educational assistance for the young, food for the hungry, housing for the homeless, poverty grants for the poor, legal protection for blacks, rehabilitation for the disabled, higher benefits for the unemployed, fair labeling for consumers, and civil rights and a safer environment for all. Congress enacted much of this program within a matter of months. Aid to elementary and secondary education came in April, Medicare in July, voting rights bill in August, a housing bill with rent subsidies in August as well, and a $1.785 billion anti-poverty bill in October, which doubled the amount appropriated in 1964. The sweeping changes in society did not stop there, with signed legislation establishing automobile safety standards, a water pollution control bill, and a Clean Air Restoration Act. Johnson's administration brought soaring profits and a decline in poverty to Americans. Not only was unemployment reduced to 4%, but also the minimum wage was increased from $1.25 an hour to $1.60 an hour with the 1966 minimum wage bill. In 1962, Michael Harrington's The Other America shook the nation. The expose on the extent of poverty in America pushed for the implementation of a more active anti-poverty agenda. Johnson's war on poverty was centered around four vital pieces of legislation: the Social Security Amendments of 1965, which created Medicare and Medicaid; the Food Stamp Act of 1964, which turned food stamps from a pilot to a permanent program; the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, and the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act.
Hush, little baby, now don't you cry. You know your papa was born to die. All my trials, Lord, soon be over. If religion was a thing that money can buy, the rich would live and the poor would die. All my trials, Lord, soon be over.
Time and time again, LBJ took steps to carry on his war on poverty. He refused to raise taxes or impose mandatory wage price controls, preferring voluntary adherence. Yet, his efforts were not entirely successful. Although LBJ was set on fighting poverty full force, other economic issues arose during his presidency. In the early years of Johnson's administration, tax rebates were given to businesses. As time went on, inflation increased, and by 1966, there was increased vigilance in Washington on the problem. At first, Johnson refused to raise taxes, but he had to face the music, calling for a 6% surcharge on income taxes in 1967 to support the Vietnam War as well as his domestic programs. Congress did not pass this until 1968. While fighting a war on poverty at home and an aggressive war in Vietnam, LBJ was also faced with the fight for civil rights, so to say that he had a lot on his plate would be quite the understatement. For civil rights activists, Selma represented a culminating point in their struggle for equality. LBJ could no longer ignore the demands for civil rights for blacks, leading him to take the most advanced position on civil rights of any president. Johnson called the Alabama National Guard to protect the Selma to Montgomery March and held a televised talk after Selma, a sign of his moral leadership. On July 2, 1964, he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in 1965, the Voting Rights Act came to be. There was a White House Conference on Civil Rights in 1966, followed by the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which stiffened criminal penalties for civil rights violations. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967 also came to life during this time. When it came to education, Johnson also brought changes to America. LBJ secured the passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, the most massive and comprehensive federal aid given to U.S. public schools. The act also allowed parochial school students to benefit from the provisions of the act, a testament to his support of religious freedom. LBJ also proposed improved schools for Native Americans and vocational training for the unskilled. In November of 1965, he signed the Higher Education Act at his alma mater, Texas State. The act increased the federal aid to colleges, provided scholarships for students in need, and created a national teachers' corps. Although the acts were beneficial to educators and students, expenditures for the U.S. Office of Education skyrocketed from $50 million in 1960 to $5.6 billion in 1973. LBJ consistently tried to ensure justice for any and every group. He signed an immigration bill that eliminated national origin quotas, appointed the first black man to the Supreme Court, Thurgood Marshall, and appointed Robert Weaver, a black man, as the first Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. LBJ's promotion of freedom and rights came to a screeching halt when it came to the press. He was known for manipulating reports, using rewards and punishments with them, as well as berating editors who published unfavorable stories.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going on a trip in our favorite rocket ship, zooming through the sky. Little Einstein, climb aboard, get ready to explore. There's so much to find.
3, y'all gotta count.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.